Bright morning stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Days are breaking in my soul. Oh, where are our dear mothers? Oh, where are our dear mothers? Oh, where are our dear mothers? Days are breaking in my soul. They are sowing seeds of gladness. They are sowing seeds of gladness. They are sowing seeds of gladness. Days are breaking in my soul.
Good morning, dear ones, and welcome to Unity Church. A special welcome to those of you who are visiting with us today. This morning, we tune in from our singular rooms to join together in worship. Welcome to this time we set aside each week to help us find and keep our balance, to think about those things that matter most, to root out racism in ourselves and in the world, understanding that becoming anti-racists is an ongoing daily practice and not a statement. We do this to better align our lives to integrity, service, and joy. This morning, we are delighted to extend a special welcome to the members and friends of the First Universalist Church in Minneapolis and to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Mankato, who are joining us virtually. A special welcome to all of you. Here in the sanctuary of Unity Church-Unitarian, your worship leaders gather, taking appropriate precautions, learning as we lead, to offer clarity, comfort, and inspiration in these trying times. We know that nothing can replace the face-to-face, hand-in-hand, voices raised in song, embodied worship can bring. We also know that the ministry we share has never been about a building. This church community is not closed. After the service, whether this is your first time or you've been here your whole life, you're invited to participate in a virtual Zoom coffee hour where we will share a bit of our lives with each other and get to know each other more deeply. Stay for just a few minutes to say hello, or stay up to 45 minutes to connect in smaller breakout rooms. Information about how to participate is available on Unity's homepage, and a link to coffee hour will be shared at the end of the service. Next weekend, we will celebrate our annual Merging of Waters. On Saturday, September 12th, our water collection pitchers will be located just inside the main entrance on Portland Avenue between 1 and 4 p.m. We invite you all to bring your water and your backpack, our school bag, for blessing of the backpacks, and share in the rituals, reminding us that we come together to renew ourselves, if only in spirit right now. Whether or not you are able to stop by on Saturday afternoon, please send a photograph of the location where your water was collected to martha@unityunitarian.org so that your offering can be included in the ceremony. On Sunday, we will merge the water during a live stream service at 10 a.m. with musical guest Peter Mayer. In the coming days and weeks, we will continue to find new ways to come together for worship, for learning, for deep connection, for justice making, and for love. Welcome and stay tuned.
What a summer, eh? I'm glad it's Labor Day weekend. And in other ways, I know that racism and anti-racism work won't be over for a long time yet. We, well, Louis, Dane, and I, have been talking and sorting out what is hospitality and its opposite this summer. To start, and keeping in mind that lexicography tends to lag behind social change, I turn to a handy friend, a thesaurus. Writers are divided on the use of a thesaurus, but if you are like me and want to be sure that you are using a more precise, specific, or explicit word, then there is no conflict, disharmony, or scrap about it, unless, of course, you use it for redundancy. Roget, the 19th century linguistic architect, created order out of chaos from the time he was just 8 years old through his 90 years. Biographers believe that this early list-making that led to his invention of the thesaurus was a coping mechanism for the personal chaos of mental illness that plagued he and his family. Under the entry for hospitality, you'll find the words friendliness and warmth. At Unity, we strive for radical hospitality, which is reaching beyond friendliness and beyond divides to welcome the stranger. Congregational hospitality is such an important value to our faith that the UUA recommends doing a secret seeker assessment, which is like a mystery shopper for church. But Roger doesn't help much on understanding the opposite of hospitality. It's more than discourtesy or ill-breeding. Just like the opposite of racist isn't not racist, as historian Ibram X. Kendi says, but anti-racist, the opposite of hospitality is anti-hospitality. An industry expert explains that anti-hospitality can take the form of selective hospitality. This would be like when we invited Booker T. Washington to Unity Church, not to preach to the whole congregation, but only to speak to the select women's group in the parlor. Anti-hospitality is not limited to race, but is definitely a form of racism. I'm thinking there's a coping mechanism that will help us create order out of what has felt like chaos this year, and for our longing for an anti-racist, hospitable world. Listen for it. Come, let us worship together.
Please read with me in unison. Mama, exhorted her children at every opportunity to jump at the sun. We might not land on the sun, but at least we could get off the ground. I invite you now to join us in a moment of silence.
Each time we gather for worship, we set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. Together, we recognize the cycle of life and death, the circle of love, compassion, and witness that is at the center of this and every sacred community. We stand at the side of parents and teachers and all those whose primary spiritual practice is caring for children, with those who live with grief or chronic pain, with illnesses seen and unseen, with mental disability or addiction. We pray for our neighbors in prison, for those who care for family members in ill health, and those who are struggling to stay afloat in the midst of poverty. Our lives are blessed by those who knowingly and with curiosity and courage face their final days. We pray for those in harm's way, for the wisdom and strength of the leaders of the world, and for the people of this courageous congregation, as together we live into our longing to embody and help to build the beloved community. And will you pray with me for all these we now name? We honor the life of Carl William Bill Rasmussen, Emmy Rippey's older brother, who died last Sunday in Colorado on he and his wife Barb's 62nd wedding anniversary. He was 87 and had been dealing with metastatic melanoma for more than 2 years. We also celebrate the life and mourn the death of the Reverend Ellen Brandenburg, who served our association as an educator, a minister to youth, and to her colleagues. She leaves a legacy of respect, compassion, and honesty that blessed so many throughout her career. Mary Canatterud and Jim Johnson ask for prayers and thoughts of the congregation in memory of their precious godson, Nick, just 30, who died in March, and whose remembrance service was held this past month. We hold the Bend family in our thoughts and prayers. Meredith Bend, having recently celebrated his 100th birthday, is now facing his final days. We send our healing thoughts and prayers to Be Close, beloved friend of Heidi Burkholz, who is living with heart failure and is adjusting to a new way of life. And we are delighted to announce the birth of one more Redeemer. Marg Walker is thrilled to announce the arrival of her first grandchild, Adelaide Hannah Bringawat, born to her son Jonathan and his wife Annie on August 23rd. Marg was able to go to Chicago to help out in the days following her birth and can testify that Addie is a bundle of sweetness. Lastly, we acknowledge all the currents of grief flowing all over the planet as lives are compromised or lost to coronavirus. Every day, people are getting sick, striking our communities of color disproportionately, some of whom are struggling to recover, some who are lost to the virus. Every day, the grief grows. May we each light a candle of healing, memorializing all that has been lost, for and for those finding their way into an altered life. May we stand in compassionate solidarity with our neighbors here at home and all around the world. May we and they be instruments of a just and lasting peace. I now invite you to speak aloud or hold in the silent sanctuary of your hearts the names of those you would like to lift in worship today. And will you pray with me? Grateful for this hour together, may we listen to and hear the music and messages that create a sacred space of understanding. May we hold fast to these words of Harriet Tubman. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember, you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars, to change the world. And may we no longer tolerate deferring great dreams, but instead, let's jump at the sun. Amen.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots holding close, wings secretly free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
The Benedictine nun and wise elder Joan Chittister says, hospitality is love on the loose. And that makes me wonder if it's anything like a tiger on the loose or a bear on the loose. Which reminds me of a story, a fable, some say from India, others say from Malawi, Africa. A fable about a mouse on the loose. I want to invite the children joining us this morning. As we do, draw a little closer. Come a little closer for the story. One day, the mouse who lived in the farmhouse looked through the crack in the wall and saw the farmer and his wife opening a package that they had received in the morning mail. I wonder what delicious food this could be, thought the mouse, but quickly was horrified to see that inside the package was a mouse trap. And the mouse went out into the barnyard, warning everyone and causing a disruption. There's a mouse trap in the house. There's a mouse trap in the house. The chicken clucked and scratched and said to the mouse, Mouse, I can see that you are greatly agitated and concerned about this, and it does matter to me as well, but of little consequence. For you must understand, Mouse, that I live all the way over here in the hen house, which is not anywhere near your farmhouse. Oh, I am concerned, and when I face difficult challenges, I'm the kind of being that is either all or nothing, Mouse. I do things perfectly. And Mouse, that might mean that I move into the farmhouse and I forget about everything that I've been doing here, but But Mouse, you must see that I have been very, very busy laying eggs that the farmer expects from me, and surely I can't give this up. I don't want to do anything, to start anything half-heartedly. I would just be a hypocrite. I'd rather just leave it to others, right, Mouse? Others who can do it perfectly. The mouse ran to the pig. There is a mousetrap in the house. There's a mousetrap in the house. And the pig sympathized. Yes, Mouse, I can see. This is of great concern, but Mouse, there have always been difficulties. There have always been mousetraps in the world, and no one said that it was going to be simple and easy for animals on the farm, did they, Mouse? I'm thinking that this is all just too much. It's all a little hopeless, isn't it, Mouse? But please rest assured, I do sympathize and I do wish the very best for all of us. And so the mouse ran to the cow. There's a mousetrap in the house. There's a mousetrap in the house. And the cow ruminated and thought long and carefully and slowly. Yes, there is a mousetrap in the house, said the cow, and that does concern me. It is a grave and pressing challenge. But, Mouse, this is not anything new. I have faced this problem before, and I have done my part, said the cow. You see, when we cows were in the barn, and all of our food was in the barn, and the barn was next to the farmhouse, the rats would be attracted to the barn, and some of them, as you can understand, would run into the farmhouse. But we cows show the farmer that we much prefer being out in the pastures, so no need for keeping food in the barn, so less mice to bother the farmhouse. Yes, we've done our part, Mouse, and now we must leave it to others who can handle their problem. The mouse hung its head and went back to the farmhouse. And that night, in the dark, there was a sound to be heard, the snapping of the mousetrap. The farmer's wife heard the sound, and she rushed downstairs, but in the darkness did not see that there was a venomous snake that had caught its tail in the mousetrap, and the snake bit the farmer's wife. And the farmer rushed her to the hospital, but in the hospital there was no stockpile of vaccine or anti-venom. There was not much that they could do. So the farmer brought his wife home, where she had a cold chill and a fever, and the farmer thought, what could I... Of course, fresh chicken soup, nothing better than that, thought the farmer, and went out to the hen house for the main ingredient to prepare the soup. The farmer's wife didn't get any better. But the friends and the neighbors, in a culture where everyone knew hospitality mattered, they came to visit and to keep her company through the long hours. The farmer thought, I need to feed all my neighbors and guests. What could I give them but bacon, thought the farmer, and so went out to get the pig. Not many days later, the farmer's wife died. And so everyone from the community, near and far, those who were friends and strangers alike, gathered for the funeral. And the farmer thought, what do I have that can feed all the community? And he knew to go out to get the cow. And the mouse watched all of this taking place from the crack in the wall, knowing that if there is a mousetrap in the house, the whole farm would be at risk. And knowing that unless there was a love let loose in the world, nothing would call us out from our places to risk being with one another in a much braver world. And so may we be summoned. Amen.
The church's financial obligations continue. Your support of the church is an expression of the promises we make to each other and to the world. We know that some of you have had your hours reduced and that some of you are furloughed or have lost your job. Please let us know if you are facing financial difficulty. We're here to help. But don't let fear undermine your commitment to the ministry we share. Please do your best to be generous with the church so that the church can in turn maintain our staff and programs and keep our promises to the many community partners our Sunday offerings support. Today, the larger portion of our offering will support Sarah's Oasis, a home dedicated to the safety and dignity of a diverse community of women in need of support after surviving significant trauma. The hope for the women who have lived at Sarah's is that they will perpetuate peace as contributing members of their new communities with newly developed skills, revitalized confidence, determination, and courage. Since 1996, through the ongoing ministry of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, more than 600 women in our community have been able to call Sarah's home. During the offering interlude, please visit Unity's homepage and follow the link in the Sunday service section to make your donation. You can use the Give function located in our Shelby Next membership app and online database, or mail a check to the church. Thank you for your generous donations.
It doesn't have to be like this. 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 It doesn't have to be like this.
Today,
It doesn't have to be like this.
another
It doesn't
world
have
is
to be like
possible.
this.
Today,
It doesn't have to be like this.
another
It
world
doesn't
is
have to be
possible.
like this.
Today, another
It
world
doesn't
is
have to be like
possible.
this.
Today, another
It
world
doesn't
is
have to be like
possible.
this.
One more time.
It doesn't have to be like this.
Another
It
world
doesn't
is
have to be like
possible.
this.
This is from John Lewis's parting words to our nation. It was an essay published shortly after his death and read at his funeral. Listen to it as if he's speaking to us, to you. While my time here has come now to an end, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people, motivated simply by human compassion, laid down the burdens of division. Around the country and the world, you set aside race, class, age, language, and nationality to demand respect for human dignity. Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. He was 14 when he was killed, and I was only 15 years old at the time. I will never forget the moment when it became so clear that he could easily have been me. In those days, fear constrained us like an imaginary prison, and troubling thoughts of potential brutality committed for no understandable reason were the bars. Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said, "We are all compliant when we tolerate injustice." He said, "It is not enough to say it will get better by and by." He said, "Each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, speak up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state, it is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love, and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. And when historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide.
Waiting for a Greyhound bus at the Los Angeles station by Cynthia Guardado. A black woman stands with two toddlers hanging off her hips. Her balance is perfect as she pushes her luggage with one leg. The boys curl into her shoulders, unaware of how they all slide forward. I offer her my help. Her face is serious when she says yes. On the bus, her boys nestle into their shared seat. The driver, a white man, begins his head count, duck, duck, goose. He asks for her ticket, says only one child is free, tells her to pay for the other or get off. It's past 2 a.m., and he threatens her with the mention of his superior. What goes through his mind as he argues with the mother juggling her children? Empty seats surround us like silent witnesses. This time rules can't be broken? I stand up to say, one child is with me, but this young mother doesn't trust me or the difference between us. Another woman stands and says the child is with her, and then another woman says the child is with her. Something beautiful is happening here, and the driver can no longer fight our unity or the energy within us.
Our preeminent historian of racial relations and inequality in Minnesota, William D. Green, writes in his latest book about the heroic but ultimately disappointing behavior of one Morton Smith Wilkinson, a good and decent man, a genuine hero in the cause of emancipation. He was a relative of early Unitarian leader Elliott May, and thus also our own minister several generations later, Frederick May Elliott. Wilkinson was one of Minnesota's first U.S. senators after statehood, and he served there all during the Civil War. He later represented southern Minnesota in the House of Representatives, and our friends watching from Mankato might know that he is buried there. Green writes that Wilkinson did, quote, more than anyone else to persuade the white men of Minnesota to extend voting rights to black men, unquote. But he, Wilkinson, did not do so well in the face of the seismic wave of white backlash that roared back, as it always does, against this progress. In a speech in St. Paul at Ingersoll Hall in 1869, right near where City Hall is today, Wilkinson uttered these words: "So far as Minnesota is concerned, we have done our part in the enfranchisement of the colored race." To the black people in the room, he added these words directly, a classic expression of white privilege and distancing that we hear frequently from so-called colorblind conservatives. He said, "The solution of that question of how your race can gain respect remains with you." Wilkinson probably meant well, but let's take that statement apart. White people had been immorally disrespecting and committing or tolerating unspeakable atrocities against black people for 250 years in this land, and many white people benefited enormously from all that uncompensated labor that built the White House, and much of the physical and economic infrastructure of Western civilization's colonial capitalist society and system. And now, despite this despicable history and ongoing state of profound disrespect, Wilkinson was saying to the several hundred black citizens of Minnesota, it's on you now to gain our respect and catch up with our enormous white advantage, if you can. From that point forward, Wilkinson and other white Minnesotans basically turned the cold shoulder, dropped the ball, discouraged immigration by people of color actively, tolerated discriminatory law-breaking and housing covenants, and built a great, prosperous state, distinctively progressive and egalitarian when it came to economic class and opportunities for poor white people and immigrants from Europe. Wilkinson and other Northern liberals nationally abandoned Reconstruction policies that attempted reparations and equity ownership of this country, exemplified by the idea of 40 acres and a mule, maintaining and securing advantage and privilege for their children and grandchildren. It was more important to them to make peace with their Southern white kinfolk than to finish the job of freedom and equality. I've seen firsthand in my life this accommodation to white backlash since the Civil Rights Movement, and now in Minnesota as our diversity has increased dramatically, with people of color growing from 2% of our population in 1970 to about 20% now. For years, I've heard liberals and labor people especially argue that all progressive framing has to be around overall inequality, avoiding too much emphasis on racial justice in order not to antagonize or frighten the less enlightened white people. That time, I hope, is passing. This oblivious inattention, turning away from the most important inequalities and worst original sin of our nation, was reflected in our own church history, according to an in-depth study published by our own members in 2005, and which contains the Booker T. Washington anecdote that Shelley Butler referenced in the call to worship. In fairness to ourselves, we are waking up and catching up. Minnesota, over the last 75 years or so, has at times been a beacon and a truer North Star state, in keeping with that great spiritual, the lyrics that urged slaves to follow the drinking gourd and the North Star to freedom, refuge, and hospitality. Black Minnesotans like St. Paul's own Roy Wilkins and Josie Johnson helped break barriers and win huge, important civil rights victories. Hubert Humphrey, like that early Wilkinson, may have done more than any white man in this nation to advance the civil rights movement. And Paul Wellstone's alliance with Jesse Jackson and his unapologetic embrace of the Rainbow Coalition and racial equity, not just the illusion of opportunity, burnished this reputation. Despite too many cold shoulders, there were open arms too, especially in the religious community, and many immigrants and newcomers of color flocked to Minnesota over the last 50 years because they perceived it as a relatively welcoming and hospitable place where their lives could be improved. For many, this worked out. Even George Floyd was quoted as praising Minnesota and liking the fact that he had moved here from Texas before we killed him. As we consider and expand on this theme of hospitality in September and this fall, we have to consider the better idea of radical hospitality, described by Marilyn Sewell in our national online website as revolutionary generosity. And maybe conventional hospitality is not at all the best framework for what needs to happen. Conventional hospitality implies that a giver or a host rightfully owns a place or resources and shares a small part of it for a brief time with someone in need, with a visitor or a newcomer. Newcomer? Native Americans were the original and wrongfully displaced owners of this place, and most black people have deeper roots in this nation than most white people. And their centuries of stolen sweat equity entitles them to a more equal share. More than hospitality, our sisters and brothers deserve reparations in some form, and to be restored as equity partners or full partners in our community and economy. It is tempting to say that at least in recent years, we at this church are getting better at doing our part too. Surely, there aren't many churches with predominantly white memberships that are doing more. Our congregants and ministerial team has been persistently focused on elevating this anti-racism movement, involved in dozens of initiatives, taking strong stands, hitting the streets, getting arrested in acts of civil disobedience. We raised the Black Lives Matter banner on the outside walls of this church years before it was popular elsewhere, and no doubt have lost members who felt we had become too radical and too political. This is good, and I'm proud of this effort by our congregation to prioritize racial equity, to make it our main thing. I like the fact that when you click on our main page, the first thing you see is George Floyd's face and calls to specific action to do the next right action. But as long as these disparities and injustice persists, we have not yet done our part. We can and must do more. Here's 4 things for us to do right now, starting this week. We implore you to put one or more of these things in motion from home today before you leave your computer screen. On Wednesday evening, join our effort to bring more souls to the polls. Search on our website under the calendar for Wednesday and register for hashtag #UUTheVote. It will be an opportunity to learn about many COVID-safe options, from posting a yard sign, encouraging voting, mailing postcards, making phone calls, all with specific guidance for effectively increasing voter turnout. This is part of a national Unitarian Universalist Association campaign, not supporting individual candidates or parties, but trying to overcome disenfranchisement and disenchantment with the system. This coming Friday is another in our Racial Justice Movie Night series. Beforehand, from home this week, watch the movie American Son, available on Netflix and other places, and we'll have an online discussion at 7 p.m. on Friday. For a longer-term commitment, join our Equity Plus Justice Fall series. It's part of our Next Right Action initiative. It's a series of 7 Tuesday evening workshops starting September 15th. It will be led by Team Dynamics and equip us with tools we need to champion racial justice in our own lives, in our communities, and in our spiritual growth and development. And finally, from now until November 3rd, we must do everything in our power to make sure our elected officials at every level are people who are unequivocally anti-racist, who understand the facts of systemic racism, who support Black Lives Matter movement and other movements by people of color. We have to make sure that our elected officials are people who push for a transformation in policing, that they are people who work to restore and not strip away voting rights, that they are people who would expand diversity training in all branches of government, and people who will oppose the forces of white backlash and nationalism. For more and even better ideas on radical hospitality and making good trouble, I'd like you to listen now to Louis Porter. Louis serves on the board of directors at Growth and Justice, and thus for many years was my boss, one of them, and my advisor and partner. He helped us develop the Minnesota Equity Blueprint, a comprehensive guidebook for racial, regional, and environmental equity. As a longtime writer and educator, he has been my friend for many years. He is hobbled by recent knee surgery, but quite capable, I think, of getting us in more good trouble. Louis, hold forth.
Thank you. Heavenly Father, I ask that you guide me so that the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart may be heard, may touch people, may hit the right notes that lead to change. If anybody asks you who I am, who I am, who I am, if anybody asks you who I am, tell them I'm a child of the Lord. I grew up hearing people say that. It's part of my Black Southern Christian tradition, and it holds forth for me and resonates for me today. Good morning. I'm so thankful to Dane. Dane is my brother from another mother. In spite of the fact that he is white, I'm Black. I am tall, he is not. Dane has a habit of, ever since I've known him, when he was a working journalist, when we worked together, and then at opposing papers, Dane is on time or early. And one part of African American culture that some other Black people may just gasp when I say this, because we sort of try to move past it, is that Black people have a reputation for being late. And I was late this morning. Dane greeted us at the door. He was nervous as a cat, but we got it together. Dane is one of the smartest people I know, and what we do is we collaborate. And some of our collaborations don't come out, but we write together, we talk about policy together, and we are a team of a Black man and a white man who work for change together. Later in my talk, I'm going to tell you that that's part of the solution, collaborations that cross cultures. What I want to do today is I want to tell you a little bit more about me and who I am, particularly as it affects race, as it affects the racism that I endured in New Orleans and affects me even today. I want to talk about some solutions based on some research that I've done, and I want to share some words of wisdom from elders, because the elders from all cultures can all help to guide us. So that's where I'm going today. I was born in New Orleans, and I was not, in spite of being 6'4", now 250, I was not an athletic person. And one of my frat brothers joked when he heard about my knee surgery. He said, "Well, man, you never were agile." Yeah, thank you, Al. Al was the best man in my wedding. And it's true, I never was agile. So I have hurt this leg the same way I hurt this one 17 years ago. I now have a match set. But I entered a contest. There was this contest for school children to become the mascot for the New Orleans Saints. And so nothing to do in the department store that afternoon as my mother was shopping. We filled it out. As I was saying, I am from New Orleans, and I was awarded being the mascot for the Saints team in New Orleans, and probably one of the kids who was least excited about that. I had my head in a book. I was reading books. I was in the Boy Scouts. I was very involved in my church. But an athlete or a follower of athletics, I was not. But I won, and it was a nice day. We had seats on the 50th yard line. I got called out on halftime, and it was a nice experience until I found out what it should have been. I found out that in addition to the seats that we had and being announced and greeted by one of the newscasters on the field and a round of applause, I should have also received a uniform of the Saints. I should have had my picture in the paper, and there were other things, and in the souvenir booklet as well. Turns out I was the first black kid to win this honor purely by lottery, and they didn't want to do all that for a black kid. What followed is very telling about New Orleans and racism in New Orleans, because my parents didn't raise a stink. There were no calls to the NAACP. We just sort of shrugged and took it. And I think this says a lot for the way that racism played out in New Orleans, in which I grew up. Now, what it did for me is that as I got older and saw these injustices, it made me more determined to seek justice for myself and for others. So I believe it had an effect on me. We're going to fast forward to Boston University, and like most college freshmen, I got hungry, I got the munchies, so I started walking to the nearby convenience store, and some white kids threw a bottle and yelled the N-word. Well, I had heard the N-word before, but I had never had it matched with violence, and it shook me up. I went back to my dorm without having gone to the convenience store, and I was just sitting at my desk kind of nervous, 17 years old, in Boston on the East Coast, having left the South to live and prove something at 17 to my family. I was shook up, and then I got angry, and I said, I'm going to get those snacks. And I walked back, and I got them without incident. I had an internship later on at my hometown paper, and that I was able to get through connections, and I was really excited about it. And one day, the NAACP had a voters table set up in some store somewhere, and it was taken down. Obviously, the NAACP was upset. They felt, for racist reasons, they were taken down. They were trying to obstruct us from registering voters and voting. Nothing new, right? So I got the story, and I wrote about it, and I quoted the NAACP leaders expressing their dismay, their disgust at the racism. My editor, an Italian-American, said, well, Lewis, you missed the story here. The story is simply that the desk isn't going to be there. It's a public service. It isn't going to be there. Don't get into all that other stuff. I said, okay. Well, by this time, I'm pushing back. So I wrote the story and thought I cleverly wove in the disgust of the NAACP and all that, because I was going to get that in the paper. 18 years old. I was going to begin making my mark. He, in front of me, put huge X's on my copy, and that wasn't enough. Folded it in half, threw it in the garbage can. Well, as an intern, at that point, you don't fight the city editor. So I shrugged again and vowed to fight more later. Thank goodness, as an adult, I've been in a position to fight and push back. At a conservative Christian college, as a mid to upper level administrator, it's a small Christian college here in St. Paul. And how I stayed there 5 years, I'll never know. Well, I think a part of it was at that time, for some of the time, we had a black provost. And he, I now know, kept me there. But I was sitting in this meeting where we were talking about racial issues and talking about making the campus a safe environment for all students. And I looked around and realized I was the only administrator of color. I was the only black man in the room. And I said to my colleagues, you don't have to read a book or have a conversation to know what it's like to be a black person or a person of color on this majority white campus. I live it. And then what happens then is what happens when people of privilege all the time happens is they get angry when you express your truth to them. And they push back on me, and one administrator in particular turned beet red, and the meeting sort of abruptly ended. I was speaking my truth and making folks angry. These aggressions can also happen at church. They can happen in the sanctuary. Believe it or not, I'm not very good at it, but I love to do it. I do praise dance. Remember, I'm not agile, but I do praise dance. And people are usually so fascinated with a big, older, black, clumsy black man having the courage to do praise dance that they just embrace it. They just love it. They don't care that I missed a few beats here and there. And so I love doing it, and I've written about it, actually. It's a great experience. Well, believe it or not, I was early for praise dance one time, Dane. This be a surprise, but I was early. So I'm sitting in our church, and the church is empty, and I'm just sort of sitting there meditating, moments to meditate. And this woman, this white woman who's a member of the church who doesn't know me, walked in and said to me as if I were an interloper or a criminal, "You are..." I said, "Huh? What? You are?" I said, "I'm Louis Porter. Who are you?" And she went on to say, "Well, you know, we're just concerned about people entering the church." I said, "Who are you?" So she finally introduced herself. And when I explained to her that I was there for praise dance practice, when one of the leaders for the team came in, she goes, "He says he's on the praise team." And the leader said, "He's very much on the praise team." And that ended that for that moment. Conversely, the flagrants, these microaggressions get us. They really get us down, and they chip away at our soul. And I actually tell white people all the time to be more mindful of them and to stop them and to stop others when you're in process of them. Conversely, the flagrance of the killing of George Floyd has called us into action. And I believe it's the inhumanity of the officer with his knee on Floyd's neck and the humanity of Floyd as he begged for his life and cried out to his mother that has galvanized the world around this. And though we had seen violence against people of color, particularly black men before, the flagrant act that ended the life of George Floyd is what has ignited a worldwide movement like no other. Clara Esther, who I'm going to quote later, talks about this. An article in The Atlantic says that an uprising in Minneapolis was inevitable. Writer Justin Ellis stated, "The conditions that led to this moment didn't spring up overnight. It's been in the making for generations. No group of protesters could devastate South Minneapolis more than years of disinvestment and abandonment already have. Lake Street was hollowed out long before the flames came." Now we turn to what comes next. I know from talking to Dane and from some preliminary research that this church has taken on the mantle of anti-racism work, that this congregation is seeking to be part of the solution. Increasingly, churches and those who study and advise them have recognized the need that the church's own issues of diversity and racism must be addressed. Since the early 1900s, the Council of Churches has adopted an anti-racist initiative, a response to the changing demographics of the state's houses of worship. An organizational statement on the initiative explains, a strategy of organizing is at the center of Macari, Minnesota Collaborative Anti-Racism Initiative efforts. Experience indicates that racism cannot be trained away. What is required is a process that organizes systemic and institutional transformation. Key to this is a trained institutional team that has developed an analysis of racism that is relevant to community and systemic transformation. This, in turn, shapes a strategic change process that involves the entire institution in the journey of transformation. Notice how many times that statement said the word transformation. The Minnesota Council of Churches uses the principles that were developed by the Reverend Joseph Barnt, a pastor and writer. In summary, they stipulate that churches must organize for systemic change, which is essential, address racism. The New Testament is a model for anti-racist multicultural community. Members are accountable for change. It's an inside job. An effective model for change must be tailor-made to the institution. Trained, equipped leadership teams is a strategy to be used. Institutional transformation requires long-range planning. A 30-year vision frames the current year's goals. The church is not alone, finally. Community and societal change are part of this effort, with accountability to the communities of color that racism oppresses. I'm going to say that again. With accountability to the communities of color that racism oppresses. Juan Pereira, in Race and Racist Cases and Resources for a Diverse America, says doing this work includes making the implicit explicit, challenge the assumptions that you have, the assumptions that you bring to the table, the assumptions that you have in your daily life, and the assumptions you have at church. Look for the hidden norm, the way things are. Avoid we and they thinking. Remember context. Seek justice. Consider the nature of the harm. Trust your intuition and ask who benefits. I would add, relationships are the key. Back when I grew up, it was very common, to invite people to your church and to be invited to other people's churches. I would take another take on that and say, invite people who are not of the culture of your church to your church, and invite yourself. Ask if you can go to another church of a friend or acquaintance that's very different. You know, so much of this work involves getting out of your comfort. Later said he regretted telling that young lady that, because Malcolm knew, as I knew then, as I know now, that the struggle is great, and we need every soldier, every willing soldier on the field, making differences big and small, day to day. Just as I get ready to close, and in my tradition in the Black Southern Christian Church, when the pastor said, I'm getting ready to close, he really wasn't. We would sit there for another 20 minutes. My wife and I marvel because I can go to 2 and 3 churches a day and just have a good time. She's like, you spend too much time in church, honey. It's the way I grew up. But I really am closing. They weren't really closing, but I really am coming to a close. Bishop Joel Martinez points out that Jesus was always bringing to the center of the story the Samaritans, the widows, children, and the lepers, and that in the center of his journey and teaching were the, quote, nobodies, the disposables, and those who are of no value to the larger society. He links Floyd's killing and the El Paso slaughter of innocents and many other incidents, and says that we can no longer evade, practice well-wishing, and calling on others to pray and be mindful of the suffering of others. The time has come for the church to embrace on every level, from local church all the way to our connection all over the world, wherever we are in mission, to challenge the doctrine that undermines the teachings of Jesus, who valued all, died for all, and calls for us to love and serve and sacrifice for all. Clara Esther, a longtime civil rights worker whose pastor encouraged her to join in the fight for the sanitation workers in Memphis alongside Dr. King, says the vision is the same because the vision has not been met. The difference between now and then is that everybody is engaged. There has not been a city that has not had a victim of police brutality. The issues have not been resolved. The good thing is that it has ignited around the movement that racism has existed in our country for years and years. She pointed out that economic inequality was the issue in the 60s, and that remains the issue today. Finally, Sue Thrasher, a longtime civil rights worker who is white and has done this work in many parts of the South, says she is now particularly interested in how white people work with other white people to encourage them to change their attitudes and practices around racism. She encourages white people who care to be involved. The battle is great. She remembers being in Nashville and feeling she could either be on the side of the future or on the side of the past. When you wake up every morning, she says, you have to consciously think about what you are going to do today to leave the world a little bit in a better place than where it was before. You can't coast just because you've been involved in something. Miles Horton and Paulo Freire use the term making the road while walking, doing what is required of us in the moment. I challenge all of us to make the road while walking and to do what is required in the moment. Thank you.
Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There will be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There will be freedom in that land. There will be freedom in that land. There will be freedom in that land where I'm bound.
There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound.
There will be singing in that land. There will be singing in that land. There will be singing in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There will be singing in that land. There will be singing in that land. There will be singing in that land where I'm bound.
Let us be guided by our love for all others and not our fear of others. Let us speak the truth. Let us live simply. Let us be of service. Let us work and strive, but let us give freely. Let us live lives of grace and acceptance and serenity. Let us walk lightly on our path and in a sacred manner. But in the face of unfairness, inequity, and injustice, let us not back down.
a gentle rain, both in our healing and in our caring. We are bringing change. We are making peace. When we are helping, we can be our best. When we are loving, hurt is put to rest. Both in our helping and in our loving, we are brave.